Hello, welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about another plant family which we use for vegetables and fruits and that's basically the Atropa belladonna group of plants, which is the deadly nightshade group, which is the more common name. And within this group there are potatoes, tomatoes and aubergines, and they are all of the same family, believe it or not. They're native to Europe, North Africa and also Asia, but these vegetables are obviously grown all the way around the world. So you know, potatoes are grown pretty much in every continent, as you can imagine. So are tomatoes, so are sort of aubergines. Aubergines are typically more sort of American and European, as in sort of Greece. They're sort of quite popular down there. Also very popular in China. You know, there's various sort of varieties of aubergines that are grown in China and Turkey, but basically they're grown all the way around the world. Now, the health benefits of tomatoes, potatoes and aubergines are all pretty much the same, to be honest with you, even though potatoes are obviously part of the root and tomatoes and aubergines are the fruits of the plant. They're all, you know, the goodness that you get out of them are all sort of pretty much the same. So if I'm basically talking about tomatoes, aubergines and potatoes now at the same time. So the full of nutrition and also antioxidants, which is good for a number of reasons, as I've explained in other ones, the other groups of vegetables. From a vitamin point of view, they're very high in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin K, vitamin B1, B6, B3 and E, and also they have carotene in there, which is vitamin A beta. And that's good for a number of reasons, which I'll come on to in a moment. They also contain copper, potassium, magnesium, phosphate, phosphorus, niacin, iron, zinc, protein, calcium. As you can imagine, you know, all of these things are really good for your body for a number of reasons. So they prevent several types of cancer, particularly tomatoes. What you've got in there are basically all of the right sort of chemicals to stop free radical or DNA mutation, which is basically what causes cancer. So there are a number of cancers which are well known to be sort of prevented by eating, in particular tomatoes, but also potatoes and aubergines have the same kind of makeup as well. From a skin point of view, the nutritions in tomatoes and potatoes are really good for your skin. The calcium obviously promotes strong bones, teeth, and all that kind of stuff, and it repairs the sort of the anti-cancer free radical type makeup of the tomatoes, and that also repairs the damage which is caused by smoking. So you know, it is really good. The antioxidants basically sort of clean the blood, and also from a heart and kidney point of view, that is really good. So they're really good for your heart and kidney. They're good for your hair and your eyes and your teeth, obviously because of the calcium and that. But from a sight point of view, by eating tomatoes, basically what you'll do is you'll improve your night vision. So you know, as they say, you know, if you eat carrots, you can see good. You know, so you can see well in the dark. It's very true to say that about tomatoes. If you eat a reasonable amount of tomatoes in your diet, it actually improves your sight and you know, particularly this is more noticeable at night. You can see in the dark a lot better. So it improves your night vision. From a diabetic point of view, eating these vegetables, particularly the tomato and the aubergine, is really good for controlling the blood sugar levels in your blood. So from a diabetes point of view, obviously what you need to be concerned about is with potatoes, there's a lot of starch in potatoes, or sugar in potatoes. So you know, there's a trade-off there. But tomatoes would be really good for diabetes. There's the same kind of goodness in potatoes, but there's also a lot of starch as well, which is obviously sugar, which then you know, has a bad effect if you've got diabetes. So it also lowers cholesterol. So all of the you know, the sort of the fats in your blood, it'll also reduce those, reduce the cholesterol. It improves the blood cells. So you've got iron and also calcium, which will enable your blood cells, and it also prevents clotting in the blood as well. And from the brain cell and nervous system point of view, the vitamin B6 is really good for sort of brain cell and nerve endings and all that kind of stuff. So you know, it's all round a really good group of vegetables to eat. The one thing you need to be concerned about is the name Deadly Nightshade. It's got that for good reason. With a potato plant, there are and a tomato plant and an aubergine plant, they're all the same. In the stems and the leaves of the plant, there are quite a large number of toxins, and also hallucinogens. So whatever you do, don't eat the stems or the leaves of a tomato plant or a potato plant or an aubergine plant, because these toxins are highly poisonous, and you can you know, obviously do some problems with your cause problems with your renal system, you know, your liver and your kidney, and you can also poison yourself altogether. So always be careful not to ingest any of the leaves or the stems. And if a potato has been left in the light and it starts to go green, that's also you know, if a potato's green, don't eat it, because the green colour that you see are the toxins and that. So don't eat a green potato, and most certainly don't eat the stems or the leaves off a tomato plant, potato plant or an aubergine plant, because that's where they get the deadly nightshade name from, because they are full of poison. Having said that, tomatoes, there's no toxins at all in the fruit, so the aubergines and the tomatoes are perfectly good to eat. And obviously the roots, there's no poison there, so the potatoes and stuff that you get off the root system are perfectly good as well. So tomatoes in sort of well, let's start with potatoes. Potatoes, there are a number of types of potatoes, but they're all pretty much the same, but they have a sort of various makeup. You can have in the potato family, you can have what we call in gardening as sort of first earlies, early crop, and then you have main crop, second main, and you can have late as well. So there's a number of different types of potato that you particularly plant at different parts of the year to get different types of potatoes. Now you can get fluffy potatoes. They're really good for baking or for mash or for chips as well. You also get salad potatoes, which have quite a waxy, which they kind of hold themselves together a lot better. We also have smooth potatoes like Desiree, and they're used for mash and things like that as well. Then you also have other varieties of potatoes which are better for other reasons. For example, fluffy potatoes, which are good for mashing, baking potatoes and sort of jacket potatoes, roast potatoes, that kind of stuff, and chips. They tend to be potatoes like King Edward's or Maris Piper. That's a Maris Piper potato, so that's a you know, sort of pretty good example of one. And there's quite a lot of varieties of potatoes like Maris Piper or King Edward. Another one is the one that I grow all the time, which is Kestrel, and that's another very similar one. So they're really good for you know, mashed potato and baked potato and stuff like that. And then salad potatoes, you've got things like Maris Pia and Charlotte, Sharps Express. They tend to be more of a waxy potato, and they're typically grown as an early. And then you've got the smoother potatoes, which are like Desiree. and then you have other potatoes which are more resistant to some of the problems that you get, and this kind of leads me on to the problems that you get with potatoes. So the first one is slugs. Slugs love potatoes, and when the slugs are in the ground, basically either the slugs or the eel or mealworms will go in there and eat your potato for you. There are varieties of potatoes which are resistant to this. Things like Kestrel, which is the one that I use. You've also got Arran Pilot, Swift and Cara. They are well known for being slug resistant. I'm not saying you can't get slugs in them, because I get some slugs in some of my Kestrel, but if you've got ground which has got a reasonable amount of slugs in it, you're going to get less damage with those than you would do with other varieties. Then you get disease resistant potatoes, and there's quite a few different diseases out there, to be honest with you, but the most disease resistant potatoes are things like King Edward's, Arran Pilot, Desiree, and Nicola. They're all been bred as sort of disease resistant. Now there are a lot of varieties of potatoes out there. There's somewhere in the region of 4,000 varieties of potatoes, and there's somewhere in the region of about 700 species, which are basically what potatoes came from, if you like. Those are the naturally forming potatoes. By far the majority of them, they're all edible, but by far the majority of them are too bitter to eat. So the potatoes that we do eat are basically man-bred. You know, they're the varieties that have been made by crossing the species. You know, by cross-pollinating or whatever the species to get the varieties that we use in the garden. So the best boiling potatoes are, you know, potatoes all come down to sort of the way you want to use them to cook. So a potato isn't a potato. You know, there's lots of different types of potatoes depending on how you want to eat it. So for boiling potatoes, basically what you want is either Kestrel, Maris Piper, Wiltshire or King Edward. They're a really good boiling potato because they're nice and fluffy, but they'll also stay in one piece. Baking potatoes, Maris Piper, King Edward are probably two of the best. Kestrel's also a pretty good baking potato. And then for mash, you want fluffy potatoes, things like Kestrel, Maris Piper, King Edward, Wiltshire. They're all really good. And then if you're cooking chips or, you know, sort of frying potatoes, King Edward, Maris Piper and Desiree are really good for doing that. Now the other thing that you want to do with potatoes is store them. Now the best potatoes for storing, believe it or not, is either Majestic or Maris Piper. They will store really well. You can store them in, you know, not indefinitely, but you can most certainly store them for 9 months or so. So if you want to grow potatoes that you store over the winter, the best ones to do that with are Maris Piper or Majestic. So when do you plant potatoes? Very quickly, and I'll come in a few weeks' time. I'll do a bit more in detail about potatoes and that again, but this is a really quick go through. So early potatoes go in sort of early part of March, and you crop them in May. You want to plant them, the rows about 24 inches apart or 2 feet apart, 60 centimetres, and then you want to plant the potatoes about 30 centimetres or 12 inches apart. Plant them about 9 inches deep, and then you'll be cropping them basically in May, so they're the early potatoes. The main crop or the second main crop, you plant them either, well, the main crop should go in late March, so they start to come up at the end of May. So you start to see them sort of growing, and then you can sort of bank them up or hoe them up. And then you should be cropping main crop potatoes in August, September. The rows are further apart. main crop potatoes, you want to grow them 30 inches apart, the rows, so the rows are kind of that far apart. And you plant them about 15 inches apart and about 9 inches deep, which is what I always do. And then your second main crop, excuse me, you want to plant them in early August, and then you'll be cropping them in October, sort of later on in the year. And you can't really go much later than that, to be fair, in the UK anyway. You want to plant them again 30 inches apart, the rows, and then 18 inches apart, the actual plants themselves. And the main problems that you get with potatoes, the number one is blight. That's a fungus that attacks the leaves. And you can do quite a few things to help this. By planting them in the distances I've just explained, you tend to get a reasonable amount of airflow around the plants, and that will help you with blight. You can also spray the plants with blight resistant sprays just to help the plants, but you need to spray them every week. I don't, because I think if you're going to put chemicals all over the plants, you may as well just go up the shop and buy some potatoes, to be honest with you. But you'd need to spray them pretty much every other day, or at least a couple of times a week, because as they're growing you need to spray the new shoots. So blight is a really big one, but if you plant them, you always get blight sort of July time. So if you can plant your plants in March, and then they're growing, and then just before you get to July, the plants will naturally die back. You can take the tops off, and then you'll avoid the blight, which is exactly how I do it. Second problem with potatoes are slugs. There's various ways you can get around that. You can either grow the slug-resistant varieties like I do. I grow kestrel, or you can also put slug pellets down, beard traps, all that kind of stuff. Or you can put, the other thing you can do with slugs is to put coal ash, if you can get hold of it. If you know anybody that's got a coal fire, the coal ash, the sulphur in the coal soot, will stop the slugs sort of going near the potato. The other thing you get is scab on the potatoes, which is typically poor soil. What you want for potatoes is an acidic soil if you can. They don't like alkali soils at all, potatoes. So particularly what you don't want to do is lime the soil, because the lime will affect the potatoes. So scab is typically caused by poor soil conditions. And then you've got eelworm, which are like little slugs, and all you can do really with that is crop rotation. And basically what you need to do is not grow potatoes in the ground for around 6 years before the eelworms have gone. So that's the other one. And then blackleg is a fungal type attack which goes at the bottom of the stem. Again, there's not a lot you can do about that apart from making sure you've got plenty of air around the potatoes. So that's a really quick go through the potatoes. And basically, you know, the potatoes range in all sort of shapes and sizes. That's a sort of an average type cooking type potato, and you can have other ones like this. This is purple, a purple variety, and that's a white one. They're all pretty much the same. If I cut through that, that's also purple. This is another one I'm going to grow this year, and these are Maris Pied, which I'm also going to have a grow of. But yeah, so that's in a nutshell, that's potatoes for you. But as I say, when we get closer in sort of back end of February, early start part of March, which is when you put the potatoes in the ground, I'll explain this in a little bit more detail. Moving on to tomatoes, which is the next next vegetable or fruit in the deadly nightshade family. Now, tomatoes, there are at least 15,000 varieties of tomatoes. The varieties are unreal. There are at least 3,000 varieties which are actively cultivated. In other words, they're grown, you know, throughout the world on a regular basis. But there are over 15,000 varieties. In fact, there are some people who reckon there's up to 25,000 varieties out there. The largest tomato I'll ever get is about 3.5 kilos, which is quite big. It's something like a tomato about that big, and then they can range all the way down to something the size of a pea. Come in all sorts of colours, red, yellow, purple, black, and tomatoes are really easily grown in a either outside or inside, on a windowsill or just in a box or in a hanging basket or in your greenhouse. You can grow tomatoes pretty much anywhere. The thing you need to be concerned about is tomatoes typically grow better inside, under glass in the UK. But you can grow tomatoes pretty much anywhere, so there's no excuse for anybody not to grow tomatoes, to be honest with you. You know, a windowsill you can grow tomato plants, and tomato plants will range from something that's kind of a foot high to something that's, you know, potentially 6 foot high. You know, you can grow the different varieties, you know, dependent on your need. The problems that you get with tomato plants, which I guess is the bit that we really need to focus in on. One of the biggest problems that you get with tomatoes, apart from blight, that obviously anything that affects the potato plant will also affect the tomato plant. So I've already mentioned this already. So blight is a airborne fungal problem. The way to get around that is keep plenty of ventilation. You can spray against it, all the rest of it, but that's blight. The The one thing that affects tomatoes that doesn't affect potatoes is blossom end rot, and that's when you've got, imagine this is a tomato, where the flower comes out at the bottom, you can get like a black circle at the bottom of the tomato, and that's called blossom end rot. And believe it or not, this is caused by, it's a physiological disorder, and it's caused by effectively a imbalance in the soil. So it's basically one of 5 things. It's either water. With tomatoes, the golden rule with tomatoes is it's all about watering. If you want to grow tomatoes successfully, you need to water them daily at the same time and the right amount. You don't want to water them too much or too little, and depending on your setup, I can't tell you how much water, but basically what you want to do is keep them well watered, but you don't want to drown them and have them sitting in water. So watering is a big thing with tomatoes. So if you've got blossom end rot, it's a sign that you've either you've either not watered them enough and then watered them too much, or you've watered them too much totally. So that's the first sign. The second thing is it's a calcium deficiency in the soil. So you need to make sure that you fertilise the ground on a regular basis for tomatoes. They are a hungry plant, and you need to make sure you keep putting fertiliser in there. The pH of the soil should be around 6.5, so slightly acidic. Like I explained with potatoes, they like the soil to be acidic. And what you need to have is that the fertiliser needs to be low in nitrogen, because that can also cause this problem with the blossom end rot. So what I suggest you do is exactly what I do, is I grow comfrey, and the sole purpose for me to grow comfrey is to feed tomatoes with it. So you grow the comfrey, you let that, as soon as it's grown to about 2 foot high, you chop it down, put it in a bucket. That will decompose in the bucket over the space of a few weeks, and then the juice or the tea that you get off that, water your tomatoes with it, and that's got the right chemical balance to feed your tomatoes. The other thing you can do obviously is you can buy tomato feed, but don't try and grow tomatoes without feeding them. It doesn't matter what compost you use or how good your beds are, you will always need to feed them as you're going through the season. So that's really important with tomatoes. The second problem that you get with tomatoes is tomato fruit worm. This is unusual, but what you get is a moth, and it lays its eggs on the tomatoes, and you get these little holes in the side of the tomatoes. I've never suffered with this, but I have known people who have. And all you can do is basically take off the tomatoes that are affected and discard them, and then the rest of them hopefully will be all right. The next problem you get with tomatoes is what's called hornworm, which is actually a caterpillar, and that'll eat the leaves away for you. So if you see on your tomato plants, you see the leaves have been eaten, it's more likely than not to be a hornworm, which is basically a caterpillar. Go around and pull them off and get rid of them. That's basically the resolution for that. Then you get holes in the tomatoes. So what you can get is a tomato with holes in the side. If the holes are reasonably big, or you can get your little finger in the hole, it's more likely than not to be a slug. If that's what you find, then go around, take off the affected fruit, just check that the rest of the plant has got no slugs on it, and put some slug pellets down, and you'll sort of resolve the slugs that way. And the only other problem that you get with tomatoes is you get the fruits cracking. So you'll get a tomato and then you'll get a crack on the fruit as it's because it's suddenly expanded. That's down to, again, irregular watering. So if you let the tomatoes go dry and then you suddenly water them again, the plant will suddenly take all that water up, and the tomato will suddenly expand, and that's what makes it split. So again, it's down to irregular watering. So the golden rule with tomatoes is water them regularly, and then once or twice a week water with fertiliser. The way I always think of it is, if you've got one fruit truss on the tomato, put fertiliser on there once a week. If you've got 2 fruit trusses on there, twice a week, 3 fruit trusses 3 times a week, and so on. That's the best way to think about it. So from a fertiliser point of view, it has to be high in phosphorus, and as I've explained, comfrey leaves are very high in phosphorus. You can just put the leaves straight on the ground if you like, under the tomato plants, and that will also mulch the ground and keep the ground moist. So that's another good thing. Lots of different varieties of tomatoes, and again, it depends on what you want to use them for. So you have like cherry tomatoes, and cherry tomatoes are things like Sweet Million F1 hybrid, or you've got Gardener's Delight, which is the one that I grow every year, or you've got Golden Sunrise or Tiny Tim. These are all tomatoes which are kind of that big or smaller. They're typically bush type tomatoes, so it grows out like a bush, and then you get lots of little tomatoes all over it. The second types are the main type tomato, which are kind of that big. Most of them can be grown inside and out. Things like Moneymaker, Isaac Craig, or what's the other one that I grow? I can't remember now. But there's Alicante. These tomatoes grow in what's called cordons. In other words, you have one main shoot going up, and then you just have leaves and fruit trusses coming off. So any side shoots you pull off. I'll explain this in more detail as we go through in other videos, but that's your main one. Then you get the giant tomatoes. These are the ones that sort of get I don't know, the size of a golf ball or bigger. And these are sometimes called beefsteak or beef tomatoes. And the inside of them tends to be quite a lot more dense than standard tomatoes. And these are things like Marmanda and Castelluto Geneversa, which is basically really giant tomatoes. These are quite popular in places like Spain and Italy and things like that. They're sort of quite popular down in that type of the world. And then you get other tomatoes as well, which like to grow in a bush. So tomatoes grow in two different ways. You can either grow them in cordons, which is one main stalk, and then you just get the fruit trusses and the leaves coming off, or you get the bush type, which just basically just grow out in a bush, and it doesn't matter how much you try to train them, they'll just grow that way anyway. And those are things like Red Albert is one that's most certainly a bush. The ones that I grew last year up the corner there, which is the F1, the Rainbow F1 hybrids, they're most certainly bush type. And the one that I always grow, the small one, the Gardener's Delight, that is also a bush type. I try to grow it as a cordon tomato, but I always lose. It always throws out far too many shoots for me to sort of cut back. But they are most certainly bush type tomatoes. So choose your variety of tomato wisely when you go to the garden centre or wherever. What sort of tomato do you want? Do you want a standard sized tomato, or a small one, or a large one? How much room have you got to grow it? Because bush tomatoes can take up sort of, I don't know, almost a metre squared of room in your greenhouse. So you can't grow too many of those if you're not careful. But there's loads of different tomatoes out there, as I've explained. There's most certainly over 3,000 varieties, and they're all really nice to grow, and some grow better than others in the UK. I always grow Moneymaker, Alicante and Gardener's Delight, because they always work well, and I always grow another couple just for difference. But they're the ones for me that have always grown well. With Moneymaker and Gardener's Delight, really you can't go wrong. They'll just grow away and away you go. They're really good varieties in my estimation. Finally, and I have really rushed through this, the eggplant, or the aubergine. In the UK we call it aubergine. It's typically called eggplant in America or Australia. And basically it's called the eggplant because the aubergines look like eggs, basically. That's, it's as simple as that. They come in, there's got to be at least 250 varieties of aubergines, or eggplant, and they come in lots of different shapes and sizes, long and thin, short and fat. Most of them are kind of this big. They come purple, white, red, yellow, black and white. They can be long, thin, round, funny shaped, almost like tomato-like. And you can get some that are sweet and some that are bitter. So it depends on what you want to grow. But there's the ones that are typically grown are things like Casper eggplant, which is white, obviously, and that's a reasonably large one. You've got the Black King, obviously black. That's a reasonably large one, and then you've got Ophelia, which is a small black one, about kind of that long. It's got a finger size, bit wider, and then you've got Bonica F1 hybrid, which is a medium-sized aubergine, and then you've got the sort of the Chinese styled ones, or which is like a green apple, which is obviously a green one, shaped about kind of like that. and those are the main ones to try. But there, as I say, there's lots of different varieties out there. There's some quite interesting ones. The orange ones, you can get some orange ones actually that look like little pumpkins. They're little, about kind of that big, and they look orange with the same kind of ribs around them like pumpkins. So they look like mini pumpkins. So there's all different types. You know, obviously tomatoes and aubergines are fruits. An aubergine is more of a, even though it's a fruit because it forms from a flower, it is more of a savoury type thing, widely used in Greek food and things like that, and Italian food, but and obviously Turkish food as well. But the aubergines are more of a vegetable than a fruit. A tomato is most certainly a fruit. It's sweet, you know, but you know, with salad, and we eat it as a savoury vegetable as well. But that was a really quick go through the plants, and because they're all of the same family, you can also cross them as well. You can't cross them as in cross-pollinate them, because what you end up with isn't what you're actually after. But if you imagine, if you get a potato plant, if you start a potato off, so obviously a potato will, at the beginning of the year, what you get is what's called chitting, and you get these little shoots forming on the side. If you plant that now, that'll start to grow as a potato plant, and then what you can do is you can grow, for example, an aubergine plant, and then cut the aubergine plant off and the potato plant off, and then put the aubergine plant, the top part of it, onto the potato as a rootstock, and then you can grow the aubergine plant off the potato, and you get what's called egg and chip plants, which basically the actual plant itself will bear aubergine fruits, and then under the ground you will get potatoes. So you'll end up with a plant that produces both aubergines and also potatoes. You can also cross or splice two, like a potato and a tomato plant together, and what you can get is basically a plant which will produce potatoes at the bottom and tomatoes coming off the top. So you know, you can get those, but basically this isn't one plant. What you need to do is get a tomato plant and a potato plant, cut them, and then put the two together, and then sort of graft the two together, if you like, so they're not actually one plant. But because they are of the same species, they are of the same deadly nightshade family, they will sort of go on to each other and continue to grow. So that was a really quick go through the deadly nightshade family, and they are, I would say, most certainly the two biggest cash crops that I grow in the garden. You know, I mean, I can't remember how many kilos of tomatoes I had, but if you price them up in the shop, you know, I got a lot of money's worth of tomatoes out of this one greenhouse. And so the two vegetables, if you like, even though tomatoes are fruit, I think of it as a vegetable. The two vegetables that I sort of make, or save, probably the best way to put it, save the most amount of money on, are tomatoes and potatoes. And so, you know, that, and they're both from the deadly nightshade family. So from an allotment or gardening point of view, you know, potatoes, you can always use potatoes, you can always use tomatoes in pretty much any food. You know, if you think all of the, like the Indian food to European foods to, you know, to Asian food to Chinese food, you know, American, everywhere uses potatoes, everywhere uses tomatoes. So they are a staple vegetable to grow in the garden, and they do save me a lot of money from growing them. Aubergines, I have grown aubergines in the past. I don't, as a family, we don't eat many aubergines or aubergines at all, to actually, so I don't typically grow them. But again, you know, you can grow aubergines in exactly the same way as you grow tomatoes. You basically plant the seeds about 1/4 of an inch below the soil, early spring, sort of March time. You need a bit of warmth in there, so you can start them off on a windowsill. As soon as they get to about 1 inch or so high, pot them on into some smaller pots, or some small pots, and then as they grow, plant them on again, and then you can plant them out into your, wherever you're going to grow them, your greenhouse or whatever. I will come on in a bit more detail on how to do this as we get there, but I just wanted to go through the deadly nightshade family of plants today. But you know, there's a lot more to talk about, really. I mean, I could talk for half an hour on potatoes alone, let alone tomatoes and aubergines as well. But I hope that's of some interest to you. And you know, as I say, as we get around to the next month or so to start to think about chitting potatoes, which is sort of setting them out to get you know, these little growths on them, which are the little shoots, how to do that and plant them in the garden and stuff like that. And which brings me on to an interesting fact. Why is a potato called a spud? In the UK we quite often call these spuds. A spud actually is a knife, which is a small sort of dagger type knife, and it's not absolutely certain, but it's thought that potatoes have been nicknamed spuds because when people used to plant them in years go by, they used to use a knife to dig the hole to put the potato in the ground, so that's why they're called spuds, because of the spud or the knife that was used to dig the hole out to put them in. Anyway, trivia. But that was a really quick go through on the deadly nightshade plants. As I say, I will talk in more detail on tomatoes and potatoes for sure in the coming weeks to give you a better idea of how to plant them, which are the best varieties, and I'll show you me actually planting the seeds and sort of growing the plants on. But that was the deadly nightshade family. So I hope this episode has been of some use to you. Please don't hesitate to put any comments you've got below, and I'll always get back to you, and I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.